There we go. Okay. So Google Analytics is primarily about tracking people, right? Who is this person? What page are they on? What are they doing? That type of thing. The focus of Webperf is really not necessarily about that. It's about using real user measurement, called RUM in the industry jargon, to measure the performance of your website. And the cool thing about it is, if you've ever used a tool like Google PageSpeed Insights or Web Page Test or whatever, those are really useful tools, but they're run from a server. You get to pick the location in some tools, others you can't. But they're kind of, they're real tests, but they're sort of artificial in that they're run from a server. It will simulate the device that they're on. You can simulate network conditions. You can simulate all different kinds of things. But really what we should be caring about is probably the actual people that are visiting our site, right? And that's what RUM is all about. And there are some other tools that are out there or services that are out there that will do RUM, real user measurement or metrics or monitoring, I think is another word that they use for it. But they're pretty expensive, and it takes a good bit of work to get them set up. So this is my nystudio107.com website. And I've had this up for a while so that it's, kind of gathering information. Hello, Piotr. Peter? I'm sorry. I'm sure I just absolutely butchered your name. So really the focus here is not Google Analytics in terms of not tracking people, but rather measuring the performance that people encounter when they load your page. So when you load a page in a web browser, whether you know it or not, that web browser is recording performance information when you load that page, right? And what Webperf does is it captures the information that the browser is already recording and it sends it to an endpoint. And then we can know the real experience that people actually had when they visited your page, right? Which is kind of cool. So this is the Webperf dashboard, and I've had this up and running. I think the version of this is a little bit out of date compared to what's in development, but it'll still give you a reasonable idea of what's going on. So it gives you a little dashboard that shows you the overall performance of how long did it take before the page was loaded, how long until the first paint actually happened. And the data that you're seeing here is from all of the people that visited all of the pages on your site, right? So this is a big aggregation of everything. So it's kind of an overall snapshot of the experience that people had on it. And it's got a nice little date picker, so if you want to just narrow it down to just a particular time period, you can. Probably the simplest thing is just, last year, right? Yeah, so Peter, I'll answer your question while I get scroll down to it. So the browser performance is the in-browser stuff, right? How long does it take for it to paint? How long before there's actually meaningful content? How long before the DOM becomes interactive, meaning they can actually click on things and do stuff, right? And then over here, it's showing you your slowest pages in terms of the browser performance, right? And then if we go next, we've got our server performance. So this is the time to first byte. How long does it take before, and again, this is aggregate data. So this is all of the people that have visited the site. This is on average how long it takes for the first byte to get back, how long their DNS lookup takes, right? And how long the connection phase, and this is the SSL negotiation, that type of thing. And then here, this is the slowest pages in terms of server performance, right? And then Peter, to get to your question here, in terms of the craft performance, it will measure exactly how long craft executed on average for everyone visiting your site, how long the database queries took, how long it took Twig to render stuff, and then how long everything else took, right? Some plugins may register things or whatever. And over on the right, these are the slowest pages in terms of craft performance. So I'm going to get into the detail of this a little bit. So if we go to performance, this is the aggregate of all of these things kind of stuck together, right? So database queries, Twig rendering, craft rendering, DNS lookup, connect, right? This is kind of giving you like an overall snapshot of how everything looks. And there is a recommendations pane. Like it will look at the timings, and if the time to first byte is really high, it will give you recommendations of how you can fix it and all that kind of good stuff, right? Unfortunately, my site is pretty optimized, so there aren't any recommendations for it, but that's good. And if everything looks good, then you'll get this nice little, confetti type thing, right? And now this is showing you, this is a table showing you all of your pages. And we got a nice little graph in terms of, this shows you the loading bar, basically. This is page loaded, and you can mouse over it. This is DOM interactive. And you can get a nice picture of exactly what it is that's going on here. And by default, it's sorted by the slowest page in terms of the performance timeline. But if you wanted to do something like, okay, I want to see what page that I've got that has the most database queries, right? You can just sort by that. You can say, oh, okay, 121, maybe I could look at optimizing something on there, right? Or you could also look at how many templates are actually needed to render. And in Twig, a template is anything that you include, right? So I've got like a block set up. So this huge, long Webpack 4 post has got to render a whole bunch of templates before it can output everything that's in there, right? And this tells you how much memory is being used up. So it kind of makes sense. The thing that does the most templating and database queries has got using the most memory. But it gives you a pretty good idea of how much memory is being used. And that is one of the recommendations, by the way, is that it will look at what you have your memory usage set to, and then how much is it actually using, based on that, which is kind of cool. All right. And then let's say, and we can also take a look at how many samples they are, right? So it gives you a little bit of a warning. I want you to have at least 100 samples before you can say, okay, this is really representative of people that are visiting the site. But I've been doing development, so I've been installing and uninstalling it and stuff. So we don't have tons and tons of samples on a lot of these pages, but we can drill down. And this is that specific page. So this is the Webpack config page, right? And it tells you how many data samples everything is based on. And then here is the actual performance sample. And again, all of the data that is here is from actual people that are visiting your site. So this is the real experience that they're getting. And what I found most eye-opening is the RUM performance, like the actual performance people are getting, is way slower than if you run some of these other performance tools, because usually you run them from inside the US and all that kind of stuff. So Chase, you're asking, is a sample taken on every page view? Yes, it is. I didn't know I needed until now. Well, good. And that's kind of my idea behind this. This is a tool that I wanted. I wanted to see what the actual performance of my website was, and I wanted a nice way to monitor it. If we go down a little bit further, this gives us the profile. And again, this is for this particular page. Front end, back end, craft profile, right? And then here we go. Here we go. Oh, and it uses, so this is the color spectrum, right? So it goes from green, which is fast, to yellow, which is average, to red, which is slow. And you can kind of see that represented in the graph up here. And it gives me some nice recommendations based on the timings for this page in particular. right? So it's saying that Twig is taking too long to render. Try to do less complication or less computations in it. Look into utilizing the cache tag more effectively. It's saying the time to first byte is high. Consider using Blitz or fast CGI cache or Varnish, right? And then it's also saying that the time to interactive is a little bit high. So it's saying it's 3.3 seconds, which is a little bit high, right? And then the cool thing, at least from my point of view, is you can see every single performance sample that was taken here, right? And the fun thing that I've noticed is that what usually ends up happening, and again, we don't have tons of data samples, right? So we only have 25 for this particular page. And, okay, I'll answer your other question now, Chase. So the overhead that is added is very, very minimal. So I did a couple of things to optimize that. First of all, the front end data is data that the browser is already recording. All that my beacon does is take it and transmit it to an endpoint on the back end. And it's a single database query to store this stuff in a very efficiently arranged table. And I also have a rate limiter on it, right? Because remember, we're just taking samples, right? So if we miss some samples, it's not a big deal. So it's never, by default, it never stores more than one sample every 500 milliseconds, right? So the overhead that is added, everything has some overhead, but I don't think you can even measure it because the amount of stuff that Craft does in the process of serving up a page is just monstrous compared to this information that we're recording. And incidentally, the information from Craft that we're recording is, again, something that Craft is already logging. All that I'm doing is setting up a listener to listen to it. All right? So let's get back to this page performance data sample. So these are all of the data samples that are in here. And you can take a look at them. And I've noticed that this is what happens, is that you'll have like an outlier kind of sample, right? Like everyone else is like, okay, this guy from Ireland, and this is the country code that it's coming from. This guy from Ireland who's using Linux and Chrome, it was a little bit slow, but nothing outrageous. And then we've got this crazy, for whatever reason, this guy took 48 seconds for this to load, right? And you'll find that there'll be outlier samples like this just because weird stuff happens on the internet with people's browsers and everything. But again, we only have 25 data samples. So the more samples we have, the more the data is going to be meaningful because it regresses to the mean, right? You get a really good idea of what the average truly is for it. And we can mouse over this and take a look at, what is going on here. So for some reason, the first byte of data that this guy got was 28 seconds. I mean, who knows? It could be he's on a Android, so it also records the device. So it's a Tab 2 AB-A8. I guess it's some kind of Android phone. There's the operating system. There's the Chrome version. I mean, who knows? He may have been in the Irish Highlands somewhere. He barely had an internet connection. So this is all that kind of trickled down through. But the fun thing is, so I also have it set up so that it will automatically trim outlier samples. So if you do have any samples that are 10 times greater than the mean, it will just delete them, right? This is pretty clearly some kind of an outlier sample, but it's not more than 10 times the mean, so it didn't get rid of it, right? Can you give us a URL so I show up in your data set? Yeah, just visit any page on nystudio107.com. That's what it's showing here is samples from nystudio107.com. You can go to whatever page you want to go to on there, and it will record it, and it will show up in here. The other fun thing is this table is also a live active table, so we can say, okay, how many queries did it take for various things. The data looks a little weird on my site because it's a static cache site. So once everything's been cached, you're going to see 0 database queries for a lot of these things, right? You can see how many templates it took to execute this stuff. Same thing in terms of it being a static cache site. And then same thing in terms of memory, but it gives you all this data. You can drill down through it. And you can also, you can do like a live filter. Like I only want to see people on Chrome, right? Gives you kind of a nice way to plumb through the data. Everything is paginated, so you can kind of sift through it, right? Yeah. So I am testing this live on my website, and I'm also testing it live on the devmode.fm website. And I'm testing on both because one is MySQL and the other is Postgres. And I just want to make sure that the data is all consistent between them, right? Let me go back to, well, here we're back on the dashboard. Let's go back to performance. And this table is live too. So if I'm looking for, I don't know, I want to see the Webpack stuff, right? I can just type it, limits it down automatically to it, and you can find stuff real quick that way, right? And I should probably explain these little dots. So it captures a front-end beacon, which is the user timing on the front end from their browser. And it also will try to capture the Craft timing. And on a normal website, you're always going to get both, right? But they happen at different times because Craft renders the page, and then the page is delivered to the user, and then it gets loaded, whenever it gets loaded on their end. So it marries the samples together using a unique identifier for each request. However, if you run a static cache site like I do, you could have samples where you may only have front-end samples, right? And very few back-end samples. So that's why it's showing that little indicator to show you whether it's a front-end sample, back-end, or everything kind of aggregated together, right? But let's go back to this particular... let's go to the Webpack one again. And now I'm going to consider this sample to just be an outlier. Who knows what happens. So I'm just going to delete it. And suddenly our graph changes quite a bit, right? Now the slowest one is 14. And it's very reasonable that this could happen to someone on a bad internet connection somewhere, a bad route, whatever. But you can see the recommendations now change because the overall timing of everything has changed significantly. And this is why sample size really matters, right? The more data samples you have, the more this is going to be a true picture of the overall experience that users are seeing when they're visiting your site, right? However, you can look at the individual experience that people are getting. And to me, it was pretty eye-opening because most of the testing that I do is from the United States. That's where I live. Makes sense. But the performance timings that people were getting in various places in the world were surprising to me in terms of how long they took. And you can sort stuff by country too if you really want to, see what's going on. Right? And this is a feature that I just kind of finished up. And I don't know what version I pushed to here. Looks fairly recent. So it also records any errors that happen. It records any Craft errors that are happening on the back end. And it also records any front-end JavaScript errors, which is really kind of handy, right? So you can see here we got some Craft errors that are going on. Gives you a nice little graph of the aggregate. So this is all of the errors for all of the pages, right? And then here are the pages where there are errors, and it tells you what kind of errors they were. These are Craft errors. If there were any JavaScript errors, then it would list them here. And we can go in and take a look at this. Let's see what it is. So we got some Craft errors. Oh, I didn't. Okay. So I didn't push the latest version of this. So I probably should do that, huh? Yeah, let's do that. Let me get something later up there. Get our super secret shell up here. And if anyone has any questions while I'm doing this, feel free. I know it's kind of boring to watch someone SSH in, but I just want to put the latest version up there. And I probably should have done this already, but what are you going to do? Oh, right, I was doing transcoder stuff. Okay. All right, that's not there. Let's nuke our... Come on. Nuke our Webperf. Clear the composer cache. Do a composer update real quick. Come on. There we go. Peter has one question. How much does it cost? I don't know, man. Like, I was really torn on that because part of me, web performance is super important to me, and I want more. I want everyone possible to be using it because I really think that it matters to have people thinking about that. And then on the other hand, I'm looking at what services like New Relic or Pingdom or whatever charge, and they don't offer the same kind of craft integration, and they also are kind of a pain in the ass to set up. The nice thing about this plugin is like you literally just install it and you're done. And it can automatically start recording stuff. I think it's going to end up being 99, I think. But I'm not 100% on there. So don't hold me to that. All right, so we remove that. We are now going to restart PHP FBM. And let's see if we get something a little bit better in terms of a result on here. Crap. Damn it. Oh, man. All right, I'll switch to my local dev setup. Yeah, I mean, really the way I'm envisioning this thing is it's a way for you to ensure the quality of the website that you're making for your client, right? So here's my test craft website that hopefully works. I've been doing most of my... Oh, what? Oh my God, that's hilarious. It's got my video embed stuff. That's great. Okay, so we just managed to get one timing, like we just recorded it, and there it is. It's saying all this stuff. I'm in local dev. It gives you a little warning telling you, hey, if you're in local dev, the performance isn't going to be nearly as good as you're expecting. But that's pretty reasonable. Let's see if we got any errors going on here. No errors. All right, well, let's make an error. What do you say? Let's make an error. Let's do blah, 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 blah. All right. And we'll do that in we'll do it 1 second. Give it a 1 second delay because it's an inline script. And let's go back. It's really funny that it's loading the chat in there. Okay. Oh, and my video is showing up. It's a video embed plugin I wrote for Ryan. All right. All right. So this is a terrible example because there's only one data point. So it doesn't have a nice fancy graph, but you can see that it shows you the JavaScript errors. And is that on screen? I think it might not be. Let me grow it a little bit. So it tells you the error, reference error, this gobbledygook that I wrote in there is not defined, and then here's the stack trace for it, right? And it does the same thing for craft errors. So, let's generate a craft error, shall we? Let's go to the Webperf plugin. That's Retor. This is my development box where I put all of this fun stuff. What? Why am I missing? Oh, there it is. Duh. Okay. So here's our Webperf plugin. So let's do somewhere in here, let's log an error and say some kind of error, something happened here. Hello, Chase. There we go. So now when we load our page, there's going to be an error logged. Yeah, you got some liveception going on here for sure. It's really funny. My test environments are so terrible. All right, so now we've got 2 JavaScript errors and 1 craft error. And you can see here, like, here's the JavaScript error sample, and then here's a craft error sample, and it tells you the error message, and it tells you where it's coming from, right? And kind of the cool thing about this is that you can just leave the site up there and running, and, you know, I've done it, I'm sure everyone's done it, that plumbing through the log files just sucks, man. You know, it's just really no fun at all. And this gives you one consolidated place that you can look at all of the errors that are happening, whether they're craft errors or whether they're front-end JavaScript errors, which I think is kind of useful. You know, instead of a lot of these sites, man, like, you just leave it up and running. You don't know what's going on under the hood, because unless something is really broken, you're not actually going in there and plumbing through the craft logs, right, to figure out what's going on. Yeah. Back to that. And where? I lost my window. This is horrible. There we go. So now we're back to the NY Studio 107 dealio. And I probably should mention this as well real quick. So Peter's asking, is it possible to scan the website for errors? Not with this plugin, no. Because what it is, it's all about RUM, right? It's all about real user metrics. So it's whatever people actually experience when they're loading your site, right? So any errors that happen when someone's loading your website, whether it's JavaScript or craft errors, those will be logged, but it doesn't go through and do an audit. Now, I mean, you could do something where you could just set up like a spider that pings every page, and it would record that. You'd be missing out on the real user part of it a little bit, because it's not a real user. It's a spider. It's a bot that's hitting it, right? But let's look at this dashboard real quick. So first of all, you can export any of these data samples. Like if you want to do some kind of analyzation with them or whatever, you can export them. Same thing with the errors. If you want to go and export these errors to somewhere else so that you can do something with them, oh, hey, it's showing up here again. I think it finally like uncached it or something. Yeah, okay. So this is the NY Studio site. Or no, it was the detail page that we didn't have it showing up, right? Yeah. I don't know what I broke. I think this is only half deployed. Yeah. But on the errors, you can export those too, if you want to analyze those later on. And all of this stuff is live, right? So you can pick, oh, I want only these particular dates, and you instantly get a graph that reflects that. Same thing with all the data down here. Everything's live. Everything's live. But I will say, after I've installed it and been using it for a while on my own sites, I've been kind of surprised at some of the stuff that I've seen. And it's really kind of interesting. It just shows you that the the real world stuff that actually happens can be a little bit crazy. Like, look at this. Look at this. We got a crazy, like super slow page load here. And sure enough, so it's someone running Ubuntu, Chromium 61 from the United Arab Emirates, I think this is. And they got an 81-second load time. Like, that's crazy. Super slow. And I think that's an outlier. Boom. This is a more reasonable picture of what is actually going on, right? And again, as I mentioned, it does automatically trim outlier samples for you. That one must have just not quite been outlier enough. I mean, maybe I'm being a little conservative on it. Okay, so Brett is asking about the errors. So the way that works is I actually install my own logger. Craft is already logging any of these errors and warnings. And I just install a logger that looks for those. And it pulls them out and it stuffs them into the database. And the reason they're in the database is so you can do this fun stuff in terms of searching and sorting through them and doing all that kind of dynamic stuff. So it's not parsing the log file. It's actually doing it really efficiently. Every request, I actually add a logger to it that looks for those errors and warnings and then pulls them in and then eventually ends up storing them in the database when the request is complete. I think this is really kind of pretty, like this little performance timeline. It shows you exactly what's going on. All right, so the twig rendering here was 0.81 seconds. First byte, they didn't get it until 1.04 seconds. It first painted in their browser at 1.5. First contentful paint was the same. DOM interactive, when they could actually start clicking on stuff, 1.94, and then the total load time. All right. Pretty useful. I mean, it kind of opens up a window that you never see, right? I mean, normally you work on a website, you know, hopefully if you're lucky, you run some performance testing on it before you get it out there, but then you put it out into the wild and you're just like, well, it works, you know? But this really gives you some unique insights into exactly how it is working and how well it is working on a variety. And you can see here, it records the device, the operating system, the browser, and the country. And you can get a really kind of good picture of the performance characteristics of your website for actual people that are visiting their site. Peter is asking what kind of static cache did I use. So I use Fast CGI cache. There's an article on my NY Studio 107 blog about how you can set that up. I think an easier setup for a lot of people would just be to use the Blitz plugin. But since Brett asked about it, why don't we get to where we actually do that? So I think, yeah. So for anyone who's interested in the real nitty-gritty kind of nerd stuff, I install my own logger for profiling. So it only looks for log entries that are profile level. And then what it ends up doing is it ends up recording those. So here's our profile logger. It averages up all of the stuff that comes in, and they're all grouped by category. And it stashes those away. And then for the errors, it does something very similar where it says, okay, log level error. And then there is a setting whether or not you want the warnings included in there. So if you have that on, it will include the warnings. And then it sets up another logger to grab that stuff. And again, this is stuff that Craft is already logging, right? I'm not asking it to log anything beyond what is already logged. So the impact is really minimal. And then all this does is it takes these logs as they come in, and when the request is final, it calls this method, which ends up storing them in the database. Right? So that's it. I mean, that's really kind of everything that the plugin does. There is one other thing that is not done yet. Oh, and the other kind of thing that I should mention is that for all of these metrics, it tries to explain what it is, and then it gives you a link of somewhere you can go to learn more about, a particular thing and how it actually works, right? So the one thing that is not in here is the reason it's not released yet is I want to add in alerts, so that you can say, when the total page load is over 10 seconds over a 5-hour period, ping me somehow. And initially the somehow is going to be the webhooks plugin that Pixel and Tonic released, so that you can send it to Zapier or have a Slack notification. Like, you can do whatever you want, right? And for anyone who's looking at this and they're like, well, I don't want the client to know how good or bad of a job that I did. Do I even have user groups? Of course not. Anyway, on a per user group, you can set the permissions in terms of what anyone can see. Right? So if you want to, you can just set it up, make it so the clients don't have access to it, and set up some alerts, and it will notify you if there are any problems. And then also you can go in and you can look at it whenever you want. If let's say you've got a retainer with them and you've got a certain number of hours, you can go in there and you can take a look and say, okay, what do we got here? All right, this is the overall profile. Well, this page, let's see if there's anything interesting about this page that we can actually do, or is it just some weird outlier sample that's going on here? Yeah. And to me, when I see something like this, I think I'm going to dial back that outlier, make it a little bit more aggressive, because there's no reason for it to show if the average is going to be like, 6 seconds. There's no reason for us to not trim this sample, because it's probably not relevant. Yeah, for whatever reason, the first paint didn't happen until 51 seconds in. And the front-end beacon that it uses is an industry standard JavaScript for pulling out these measurements from browsers. And it's the same thing that Akamai uses for their Mpulse service. So it's not like obviously the craft part of it is stuff that I wrote, but the front-end stuff is very, very battle-tested. It's not just something that I randomly decided to come up with. Yeah, so it's saying that Twig template's taking a little while longer to render than maybe it should, and maybe I could look into that. Maybe there's something I could do to optimize the way that it's drawing this page. Hopefully that's helpful. All right. And so, as I was mentioning before, the one major thing that I want to have in here before I do anything else is the alerts. And so I'm going to do some work. If anyone wants to watch, they can. If they got any questions, they can feel free. All right. So let's do our alert stuff. Yeah, these are all the custom permissions that they may or may not have access to. And I actually think that I might want to make some of these sub permissions. Like, probably this should be the overall one, and then these should be sub permissions. Yeah. In fact, let's do that. Okay. And what I always do is whenever I've solved a problem in some other plugin, I just go back to it and be like, okay. That's the right way to do it. All right, so there's the label, the sub settings. Yeah. Okay. So for instance, for performance, we would do something like this. And then actually, Yeah, I can just do that. And then these are going to be nested performance permissions. Perfect. I think that looks a lot better. Yeah. Oh, I see. All right. So let's do the same thing for errors. I'll just clean it up a little bit, make it look a little nicer. So here's our test install. Test group. All right, so we got that. Access Webperf. And then, yeah, here we go. Perfect. Yeah, that's just better organization, right? It's lumping all this stuff together. And probably I'll put recommendations up below that. I think that will make a little, well, nah, I think I'll leave it the way it is. So Peter is wondering, do you use Markdown for articles on the blog? No, my blog is actually, I'll show you. It's actually pretty basic. So let's take a look at one. And we're looking at the live one, just for the heck of it. So this is all it is. All right, it's just I've got a few different blocks of different block types, and then it's just plain old rich text field. And there's a little custom plugin that I wrote for code, a custom redactor plugin. But this is it. Just everything's arranged in blocks, image block, text block, blah, blah, blah. I think I probably could do it in Markdown, but there's certain things that would be difficult to do, especially in terms of the image placement, that type of thing. Yeah. All right. So we got our permissions nested. That's Tower that I'm using, by the way. Whoops. Oh, my goodness. All right, so now that we got that in there, let's do our alerts. And then we got to do our custom CP nav items. Only want to add stuff in if they actually have permission for it, right? don't want any kind of a badge. Yeah. Do we? No, I don't think so. Because the alerts are going to be triggered in some other way. When I'm working on a plugin development, what is my main source of documentation? You mean when I'm trying to figure out how to do stuff, Ben? Or what do you mean by that? All right, so we'll have our alerts in here, and they will go nowhere. Leave. Yep. Ben, you got to help me. In terms of plugin development, your main source of documentation. I guess you mean in terms of figuring out how I can do what I need to do. A lot of it I know just because I've done it before, and when I don't know it, usually it's source code. Yeah. Usually what I do is I just look in the Craft source space just to find something where they're doing what I want to do, and then I replicate it because, I mean, the admin CP is just another client of the Craft APIs. So the way they do stuff is exactly how you're going to want to do it when you're writing a plugin, or even writing front-end code for that matter, you know? All right, so we need some templates, I think, right? The one thing I haven't decided on is whether I want to bother having a widget in here or not. And the reason, I mean, yeah, okay, you could put something on the dashboard, but this is a dashboard, you know? And the one thing I do is if there are recommendations, it will list them here. So if there are any errors, you'll get that little warning thing. And then if there are any recommendations that it has, it'll give you the number of recommendations in that little badge, which I think is probably sufficient, you know, to let people know that they should probably click on it. Yeah. And everything that you're seeing here, these are all Vue components. And actually, this is all running off of my live Webpack dev server. So the nice thing is I can edit the Vue components and they instantly change in the admin CP as I'm working on them, which makes it's just wonderful in terms of live reload. It's just absolutely wonderful. All right. I guess all of these are kind of like that, huh? All right. I don't think we're going to have any includes for the alerts. We'll have to add our admin CP routes for this, though. Alert. Do I want to do that per site? Oh, gross. I guess I do. I mean, I guess people might want to have alerts that are different per site, right? Yeah, Peter, I mean, that's just a column view that is built into Mac OS. It's kind of handy. It's actually a holdover from Next. That was their default view in Next, was that kind of browser view. It's kind of handy. There's no sideways scrolling. Huh. Well, I mean, if they wanted to implement it, they could, you know. All right. Let's do our alerts. This is basically saying when you hit this URL, call this controller method. That's all it is. And since we're going to probably have them on a per site basis, that's something that I didn't demo in there, but yeah, everything in there is on a per site basis for all this stuff. It's just kind of nifty. Do I have 2 mouse wheels? No. So, I mean, the mouse that I'm using is just their little magic mouse thing. But the neat thing is you can scroll left or right just by sliding. Like the top of it is kind of like a touchpad. It's just kind of handy. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Oh, and of course, right after people install the plugin, they get a nice little, gotta have the confetti, right? Okay. Probably don't want people to be able to delete all alerts. I'm not going to be having that many of them. You can probably just individually delete them. And yeah, let's get rid of all this junk. All right. Require alerts permission. There's our site menu. And this is just something annoying that unfortunately I have to do. Craft has got some very specific CSS. Hey, what's up, John? John, that video you sent me almost made it on the live stream. Oh, my goodness. Cloudflare gets really nice confetti. Oh, man, I got to up my confetti game, huh? Actually, you know what? You actually can customize the color of the confetti if you really wanted to. Actually, you know what? This always makes for like a fun live demo. So let's do it. Let me see if I can arrange all this stuff in a way you can actually see it. I don't know that I can, but I'm going to try. All right. So, yep. Okay. So you can see the Webpack dev server down there. And let me move this over. And we are going to go to our okay. So here's our view component stuff. So here's our view confetti, right? And how can I do this? There we go. All right, John, you better be paying attention because I'm doing this for you. So let's say that we wanted hearts in here. We can just change that. It rebuilds it. Oh, look at that. They're hearts. Isn't that nice? Go back to rectangles. And if we only want red. can save that. There you go. You're taking notes. Okay, good. Yeah. But that's really the loveliness of using Webpack and the hot module reloading when you're developing plugins, especially one like this. Like, there's just tons and tons of view components in this thing. So let me make this thing bigger again. I think I got this up. I didn't quite get the sizing right. Okay. But if you take a look, so for instance, I'll disclose everything. There's just like view components everywhere. So these are my charts, common view components. These are my tables, error table, performance table. These are all of the view components that go into making the front end, or not the front end. I guess it's technically the back end UI. No, this is all in local development, Peter. So the hot module reloading just works while you're developing so that as you change stuff, you instantly see what has changed. You don't have to refresh your browser or do any of that fun kind of stuff. And it's actually really neat because it retains the state. So you can change just one component and it will only reload that one particular component that has changed. And then what I do when I'm pushing something to production is I do a Webpack build, which then does all the optimizations and minimizing and all that kind of fun stuff. Yeah, Ben, I can say it because Brandon said it publicly. He said that they're already refactoring anything new that they do as a view component, if it makes sense, right? I'm sure there are certain core parts of their UI that it doesn't make sense to refactor to view right now. But any new ones like the plugin store is all view, right? And there are other parts of the UI that they're refactoring to view. And again, Brandon said publicly that they're planning to move the whole of Craft to be a Vue SPA, which is pretty exciting. I don't know when. Don't ask me when. I don't work there. Even if I did, I couldn't tell you anything about it. But I don't know when. I would imagine that that's going to be like a Craft 4 or Craft 5 or something like that. But they are refactoring things along the way as they go, right? Which no disrespect intended. I just Garnish is just, because it's not documented, it's just no fun. It's no fun to work with at all. All right. So we got our controllers. We got a sections controller. I've got a